Max, walk me through some of these fights that stand out to you and what you're looking forward to seeing.
Yeah, I'm going to walk you through it top to bottom. So starting at the main event, which is Derek the Black Beast Lewis versus Curtis Razor Blaydes.
Lewis-Blaydes.
So I believe Blaydes, last time I checked, was a minus 350 to win.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I want to start. Like, I don't want to sell something that's not true. And on first look, Blaydes is probably going to do what he's done throughout his career and dominate. And it's not going to be close. But the more I think about this, there's a couple things that get me interested and excited about this matchup. So the first thing is, or the main consistent part of what makes this interesting, is the heavyweight mystical factor, which is you never know what's going to happen in a heavyweight fight. And Derek Lewis embodies that more than any fighter on the roster, probably. We'll talk about his power in a sec, but I actually want to start with his wrestling defense, because it's one of the bizarrest things you see. He makes solid grapplers look like they've never put on wrestling shoes and don't know how to hold him down, because he just gets up like it's not real. Like he fought Blagoy Ivanov about a year ago. Ivanov had him in a crucifix submission, which is a brutal spot to be in, and Lewis just stood up. Wrestling isn't real, jiu-jitsu isn't real. A couple months back, the win he got to earn this shot at Blaydes, he was fighting Alexei Oleinik, who is nicknamed the boa constrictor because his chokes are insane. He can have you lying on top of him and wrap his arms around your neck and choke you out. And he got on top of Lewis, which is a much more advantageous spot to be, wrapped those like super terrifyingly strong arms around him, squeezed his hardest, and Lewis's mass, for lack of a better word, just let him survive it. Like, it hurt him, it was tight, but he wasn't getting choked out. And almost any other fighter on the roster in that position probably goes unconscious.
My dude was too thick.
Exactly. So the question is going to be, like, can he do that against Blaydes? Because chances are, almost certainly, Blaydes has him down on the mat within the first 2 minutes of the fight. And the one guy where that logic or mysticism hasn't held up against was Daniel Cormier, who was the best grappler Lewis has ever fought. Lewis was able to survive a round, but he got choked out about as easily as we thought it would look like in the second round. Cormier was just a very high-level grappler, and Lewis's anti-grappling didn't hold up. And Blaydes, I don't know where I rank him against Cormier. He's a lot bigger to start, so that is going to play a role. He very high-level college wrestling background and very technical. He's just really good at moving his hips as you move his hips, keeping his weight above your weight. So the entire time you're trying to stand up, he's making you carry him while he does it. Then when you do stand up, he just shifts to the next position, gets you right back down, and keeps riding you out. It's pretty technical. It's efficient enough, and it's worked against almost everyone who's fought. So that's going to be the first question. Derek Lewis's bizarre anti-wrestling that's hard to understand versus Blaydes' technical elite wrestling. And we'll see if Lewis has any lessons learned from the Daniel Cormier fight. He took it on pretty short notice. No one seriously expected him to win. So now he's facing a similarly elite grappler. Let's see how his anti-wrestling holds up in that situation.
And then on the other side, how do you feel about a comparison? Like, where does Lewis's power rank in terms of, I mean, obviously the biggest guy in this division is Ngannou in terms of like that instant knockout potential. Is he kind of up there with that? And is that something that Blaydes should be on the lookout for?
Yeah, for sure. That's what I was about to get to. I have to keep saying almost when I talk about Curtis Blaydes, because he's lost 2 fights in his career, I believe. 2 fights in the UFC at least, and they were both to Francis Ngannou. The first time it went over, I think, 2 rounds, and Ngannou had punched Lewis in the face so badly that his eyes swelled up and they stopped the fight. And the second time, Blaydes was the favorite to win over Ngannou, I believe. And Ngannou looked like he was on the out, and he began a historic resurgence by knocking out Blaydes in about 40 seconds. And that's the thing at heavyweight. Almost everyone has that knockout power. Lewis is certainly one of everyone.
Okay.
It's a bit different because Ngannou's power comes from being a sculpted beast who's just an athletic freak, whereas Lewis's power, he's not the same type of athlete as Ngannou, but he certainly has that power. It's mostly a question of, I'd say, explosiveness. Like Ngannou is incredibly explosive, and the downside of that is cardio. He can't do that in the third round in a way that Derek Lewis can. So I said Blaydes is probably going to have Lewis down in the first 2 minutes of the fight. And that's because Lewis isn't really a come out and blitz you with one punch type of fighter. He's a always dangerous, always swinging type of fighter. So the power is similar to Ngannou, but the instant delivery system is a bit weaker. But I don't want to say Lewis isn't an amazing athlete, because he, in terms of kicks, might be the most explosive, wild fighter on the heavyweight roster. He's the only guy I can think of who regularly throws like flying knees, jumping switch kicks. And that has my interest because Curtis Blaydes is a wrestler who's had to learn how to strike. Striking, you can tell it does not come naturally to him, and he's polished his striking very much over the years, but it's very technical. That he's always trying to think, what's the conventional thing to do and how do I do it? So if there's anyone in the heavyweight division that kind of wild jumping knee shit might work against, it honestly might be Blaydes. And that's brings me to my last point about this fight, which is cardio. Lewis is actually a big reason my sister's into UFC, because the Conor McGregor card that I got my whole family to watch with me, he was on, and he got technically out kickboxed for 14 minutes, a lot like I was telling you about Paul Craig last time. And then with, I want to say 15 seconds left, he swung an overhand, caught Volkov throwing a silly leg kick, but still caught him and put him out with like 10 seconds to go. So
That's tough.
Lewis, yeah, and that's exactly the sort of story that like grabs you in combat sports, and it made him a lot of fans that night, including my sister and my uncle. So Lewis is clearly dangerous up until the last minute of the fight. Blaydes, his last fight, also against Volkov, makes this very interesting because he put a wrestling clinic on Volkov. As I was describing, just keep going, bring you down. If you try and stand up, I'm going to ride you, pick you back up, and throw you back down. But the last 2 rounds were very interesting because Blaydes really gassed. He gave this hilarious post-fight interview where he was like gasping for breath as he was trying to respond. You honestly were kind of concerned about whether he was going to have a heart attack or not during the interview. So I'm really curious to see what Blaydes does with that as his last fight. Is he going to ease up on the power wrestling? Is he going to rest a little more in positions? Or is he going to look for the finish in the first 2 rounds? Because if you put him away, you don't have to worry about the 4th or 5th round. So Blaydes' cardio questions versus Lewis's ability to be dangerous up until the last minute of the fight is the last thing that makes this pretty interesting. So we'll see. Then moving on, we got the co-main event, Anthony Lionheart-Smith versus Devin Brown Bear Clark. So let me tell you a bit about Anthony Smith first. He had a tough start to mixed martial arts. He went 5-5 in his first 10 fights. He found his groove and got his record respectable enough to 24-11 to enter the UFC, win against a win, a loss, put 3 wins in a row, And then he got stopped by Thiago Santos, who has since become one of the top 5 in the light heavyweight division. And then Smith decided to move up to light heavyweight, where he had a first-minute stoppage against Rashad Evans, which was impressive enough to let him step up to take the short notice main event against Shogun. Stopped him in a minute and a half, and the light heavyweight division was paper thin at this point, but I'll say it for what it is. 2 wins over guys that are over 35 doesn't get you a number 1 contender spot in many divisions, but it did in the light heavyweight, where he stepped up, took on Volkan Oezdemir, who was just coming off a title challenge loss to Daniel Cormier. And my recollection of that fight is Oezdemir put it on Smith for 2 rounds, got the better of the exchanges, but Smith's nickname is Lionheart. He can take a beating and then weather it and find a way to win, and that's what he did. He managed to bring the grappling in the 3rd round and found a rear naked choke to stop Oezdemir and get a title shot against John Jones. And in that title shot, he was pretty badly outmatched. Jones, who has historically struggled against guys his own size, put it on Smith like he's done to no one else with a similar frame to him. It was kind of disappointing performance from Smith. He's looked back and said, I just wasn't able to pull the trigger, but like Jones put on a kickboxing clinic. He was throwing front kicks, side body kicks, spinning body kicks, knees. And it wasn't too impressive from Smith. Then a year later, he went on to, or not a year later, 3 months later, he went on to fight Alexander Gustafsson, and similar to the Oezdemir fight, took a beating, especially in the 3rd and beginning of the 4th round. And then Gustafsson took Smith down, and Smith found a way to got into his realm of grappling, where he's quite elite, and found a way to get the rear naked choke. Next up, he had a main event against Glover Teixeira. That was the 5th month of this year, so June, where he put it on Teixeira for 2 rounds. He was vicious world beater pace, and then he gassed, and Glover started piecing him up. And the corner really should have stopped it after the 4th round, because Smith had 0 chance of winning the fight, but they didn't. They sent him back out, and he got taken out in the 1st minute of that fight. Went on to take another fight against Alexander Rakic, who threw some devastating leg kicks early, took him to the ground, and we saw that when Smith is on his back, flat or against the cage, he wasn't able to do the same things he did against Gustafsson and Oezdemir. So that brings us to now. He's fighting Devin Clark. Now, Devin Clark has got 3 recent losses in the UFC. They're to Jan Blachowicz, Alexander Rakic, who we just mentioned, and Ryan Spann. Blachowicz is now the light heavyweight champion. Rakic is in the top 5, and Spann, I believe, is ranked 12. So what you see when you look at Clark is a guy who's able to get it done against most of the division, but not the top 15. So this is going to be a check on Anthony Smith. Is he a top 15 fighter, or did he just get a bit of luck coming his way in those 2 signature wins over Oezdemir and Gustafsson? And I really feel like this is Smith's fight to lose. I just watched Devin Clark's last fight against Alonzo Menefield, and what Clark essentially did was, against a bigger fighter, force a grappling match. He just clearly did not want to be in the center of the octagon striking. So every time he found himself there, he just shot for takedowns, pushed him against the fence. And Menefield showed really poor fight IQ, because every time he got the clinch in his favor, got Clark's back against the cage, all he had to do was push him away, back off, bring it back to the center. And I think he probably would have stopped Clark, or at least been able to put a beating on him. And he didn't do that. So that's what I'm going to be looking for Anthony Smith to do. He's got, I think, a 4-inch height advantage over Clark. So that should really help him in stuffing the grappling. But I expect Clark to push Smith against the cage and try and keep it there. And what I'm going to be looking for Smith is in the center pushed a similar pace that he pushed against Glover, because this is a 3-round, not a 5-round fight, but maybe 5-10% off those punches. But don't follow him past the black line. Let him come to you when his back is against the cage, because that's where Clark doesn't want it, and that's where Smith should keep it. So this is going to determine one of these fighters is going to go on to stay in the top 15 and have top 15 matchups, and the other one isn't. If Smith can't beat Clark, it's probably time for him to retire.
Damn.
The last fight I want to bring to your attention is Spike Carlyle, who is going to be making his third UFC fight. And this guy's nickname is Alpha Ginger, and his fighting style is about as crazy as the nickname. He starts the fight and punches the gas 120% and keeps that energy wherever that initial effort takes him. I thought it did enough to win his last fight against Billy Quarantillo, which got fight of the night for being an absolute like barn burner of a grappling match, which doesn't happen too often. But it was a really fun fight to watch. But we'll see what the limits of Carlisle's fight is. I feel like the decision didn't go his way, but he's got that loss on his record. So I'm curious to see what adjustments he makes and how much of that crazy Maverick style he keeps. But very fun fighter to watch. And he's the first fight on the main card for a reason.
Knockouts for Jesus.
Yeah.